Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's the big day. The Battle Network Legacy Collection just came out, and I thought that there'd be no better way of celebrating than revisiting the first video I put up on this channel. A few months ago, I did a challenge run of Battle Network Operate Shooting Star, or Operation Starforce, which is a re-release of the first Battle Network game with a few quality of life improvements, one extra scenario and boss, and the ability to use Geostellar, or the Mega Man from the Starforce series. I'm honestly shocked at the response, despite the fact that I didn't know a thing about audio mixing and video editing, but my biggest regret is that I used non-damaging battle chips. Technically, we only did damage with the Buster, but today, we're going to find out whether or not we can beat the hardest version of every boss with both versions of Mega Man without any battle chips. First off, I'm going to face FireMan v3. We start off with regular Mega, and there are definitely some adjustments to going back to an older version of the game from just playing Battle Network 3. We're starting off pretty easy here, since as you can see, FireMan jumps around the stage and flinches with a very exaggerated animation every time we hit him with a charge shot. We don't even get hit once. Then, we switch over to Starforce Mega. For those who haven't played this game or missed the first video, the key differences include a much weaker but much faster automatic charge shot. At max stats, Starforce Mega does 30 damage versus 40 damage from stage 1 and 80 damage from stage 2 of Battle Network Mega's charge shot. Similarly though, this charge shot also flinches FireMan every time. I made one minor mistake that cost 20 HP, but this fight is a joke. FireMan is a D tier boss for sure. Now, we can fight NumberMan at Wily's Fortress. He starts off with 700 HP, and the strategy is to just stand in the rightmost middle panel and mash the B button as fast as possible with regular Mega. At low health, NumberMan starts summoning dice blocks and time bombs, so we move away slightly, defeat them, and go back to the pellets. We get an S rank easily. The fight with Starforce Mega is even easier, since one of his special abilities is to rapid fire when we hold down the B button instead of having to mash. I decide to play around and use the charge shot for a little bit towards the end, which gets us a slightly lower score, but overall, NumberMan is easily a D tier boss. Nearby, we can find GutsMan at Wily's Fortress when we speak to Dex. Unlike in later games, he doesn't actually add newer or stronger moves with his final form, but instead is just slightly faster and does slightly more damage. We finish the fight with no damage taken when we go in with Starforce Mega, because we're basically just charging up and waiting for him to enter into our row. Battle Network Mega is even easier, which is going to be a pretty common theme due to a stronger charge shot. We also flinch GutsMan, and so we get rid of him very quickly. As you can see, we finish both battles without getting hit at all. Because you do need to dodge pretty frequently, GutsMan is slightly harder than FireMan and NumberMan, both of whom require almost no thinking, so I'll give him a C tier. Now we have to go back to exploring the internet a little bit. We can find StoneMan in Internet 3. He has 800 HP and basically has the same moves as V1. StoneMan stands in the back row and occasionally summons blocks and throws rocks onto our side of the field. Even this version though is extremely slow. I start off with Starforce Mega and basically just blast him with charge shots as soon as they're available. We don't really have to move out of the way because the falling rocks only do 30 damage each. This is a pretty easy battle to do damageless, but that's not the goal for the video, so I take him down quickly. In our fight with Battle Network Mega, due to our stronger charge shot, this battle is even easier. We do 80 damage at a time, and I just stand in place, charge up, and unleash. On our results screen, we get a faster time but a slightly lower score since we did get hit a few times. So far, the early bosses in this game are not very difficult, so StoneMan also goes into the D tier. Now, things begin to start getting interesting. We can head over to Sal's stall in front of Scilab to fight WoodMan. This battle is pretty straightforward. She has two real attacks. The wood tower is our classic diagonal attack that I somehow still struggle with a lot, but the attacks just do far too little damage for us to be worried. WoodMan doesn't flinch against the Buster like some of the earlier bosses. His Death Force attack is great for us, since we can just stand in place and rapid fire him to death. We have plenty of HP to tank his attacks, and the panels that are hit seem to be random anyway. Now, switching to Starforce Mega, the battle is not very different. I try incorporating the shield in order to deal with some of his tree towers, but it doesn't make a major difference and the lag is arguably much worse than just trying to avoid it normally. At some point, similar to the prior battle, I just stop bothering with the charge shot and start shooting him with pellets just like with Battle Network Mega. I'm going to put WoodMan in the B tier. On one hand, he's extremely slow and his attacks don't do a ton of damage, but on the other, he has a wide area of effect and it's hard to avoid his attacks while still dealing out a ton of damage. The last boss we can find at Wily's Fortress is IceMan. I start off with Battle Network Mega, and like the original version of the game, he's quite hard buster only. He creates blocks of ice that get in our way, and they take a ton of damage to take down. While we shoot at the ice blocks, IceMan can either push them towards us or throw an ice bomb our way. I typically see this attack coming, but I'm usually so focused on increasing my window of being able to attack him that I take the hit and keep firing. We become frozen when we get hit by the ice bomb, and it also hits in a plus shape, meaning that we need to move out of the way diagonally, which we usually don't have the time to do since I'm stuck in place trying to fire. However, between the ice blocks going down and IceMan recreating them, we can get a number of charge shots in, which helps us win the battle. The fight with Starforce Mega goes almost the exact same way. I say almost because the minor difference is that the quick auto charge shot allows us to break down the ice blocks just a little bit faster, meaning that we can get a couple more hits in each time. That's pretty necessary given the fact that we do a ton less damage. I'm sure the IceMan can be beaten without taking any damage buster only, but the battle would last a very long time, I imagine, and I just don't have the patience for that, especially when we have so many other bosses to take down. This is our first A tier boss. Next up, we can go to the antique shop to fight SkullMan. He has 3 major moves: a fire breath attack that can move straight down the row, 2 swinging arms that can float around our side of the arena, and finally, his head smacking onto one of our panels for major damage, although he rarely uses this move. The only real attack to worry about is the swinging arms, since they can limit our area of movement and leave us vulnerable to walking right into the fire breath. Thankfully, the arms go down easily with just 2 charge shots from Starforce Mega. My goal is to get rid of them as soon as possible, and that makes the battle incredibly easy. We can take SkullMan down without taking any damage. If that's the case with Starforce, the battle is only slightly different with Battle Network. This time, the arms go down in a single fully charged shot, and we do 80 damage, meaning that SkullMan goes down in 10 hits. Similarly, as long as we get rid of the arms as soon as possible, we really don't have anything to worry about. SkullMan is a C tier boss because he's very similar to GutsMan in many ways. We do have to work for it, but we can easily defeat him without taking any damage with some basic navigation skills. Now we have to start going deeper into the undernet in order to find our bosses. This is an interesting one, since there's a much lower chance to find ColorMan than the other navies, at 2.1% versus the standard 6.25%. Starting off with Battle Network Mega, this is a pretty annoying fight since ColorMan just hides in the back row and I'm really bad at avoiding the diagonally moving attacks. ColorMan occasionally lets the ball under him start rolling around our side of the field, which does decent damage, but we finish him off pretty quickly overall since he desyncs from his towers every time they use an attack. Whenever he moves to the top row or the bottom row, we're usually able to clip him with a charge shot until he goes down. The battle with Starforce Mega actually goes slightly differently. We have to hit him several more times due to the weaker charge shot, but ColorMan actually stays in place for a huge part of the battle because we don't get hit by his ball move immediately. As a result, the ball follows us across our side of the arena, and we have to navigate both it and the aqua and fire towers while trying to get a clean hit into ColorMan. I eventually get hit and we revert back to the normal battle. Next time he uses his ball attack, I intentionally get hit by it since it's pretty hard to actually hit ColorMan when he's stuck in the middle. I miss a ton, but when ColorMan goes back to strafing up and down in the back row, we're able to do the same thing and clip him until he goes down. I'll put ColorMan in the B tier as well. It's a long fight due to the lack of vulnerability, and there's quite a bit of maneuvering that needs to be done in order to do well against him. Now it's time for our first really difficult boss of the game. We can go back to Masa's stall in front of Scilab and fight SharkMan v3. SharkMan has 3 fins that strafe up and down, any of which can rush at you when you're in the same row as it. One of these fins is SharkMan himself and is vulnerable. When you hit that one, he pops up for a moment and does an aqua tower, although the other fins keep moving as well, so you have to stay on your toes. I had to retry this battle many times, and it was actually surprisingly much easier with Starforce Mega. The fast, auto-charging charge shot means that it's very little commitment and you can try shooting each fin with little risk, as well as getting 1 or even 2 more charge shots in after SharkMan pops up. One of the best things though is that this is a great place to use his built-in shield. We can stand in place, and if we see that we're in a tough spot between the aqua tower and the oncoming fins, we can use the shield to protect ourselves. The shield is probably something that I undervalued and underutilized during my original playthrough, but similar to this fight against SharkMan, I've been experimenting and testing it against most of the bosses to see whether or not it would be helpful. Thankfully, it is against SharkMan, and so he goes down. Now, switching back to the regular Mega Man, we have a slightly harder version of the same fight. This time, we have a much stronger charge shot. However, the battle lasts much longer because first of all, it takes longer to charge, so there's a higher cost to missing or picking the wrong one, but on the other hand, once we know which fin is SharkMan, we can get a guaranteed 80 damage in, and usually follow up with at least a 40 damage medium charge shot most of the time. Unlike what we've gotten used to later in the games, SharkMan doesn't change his attack pattern in the second half of the battle, so we're able to take him down by being patient and baiting out the fins such that we can clear out and figure out which fin is the actual one. While this battle was much longer than the Starforce one, we do take fewer hits because we have the benefit of just having fought him and figuring out his attack pattern. SharkMan is easily an A tier boss. He is definitely one of the harder bosses in the game, although he's probably an average boss compared to some of the ones we fight in later games in the series. For example, if you haven't seen the Omega Navi Super Boss cut for Battle Network 3, you should definitely give it a watch after this one. Next up in the Undernet, we can come across ElecMan. I start off with Starforce Mega, and ElecMan really has only 2 attacks that we need to be worried about. One of them is when he summons electric rods onto our side of the field, and we have to break one of them in order to get rid of all of them. They're really not that bad, but their placement is pretty random, so you may get hit if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. The other attack is when he summons lightning to follow you around, but it's pretty widely telegraphed given that the panels glow purple. This is also fine for us since ElecMan stands in place, making him an easy target. Towards the end of the battle, I mistime an attack and get hit, so I get impatient and just tank his attacks to take him down with the pellets. As normal Mega, the battle is, as usual, much easier. We get a little luckier with the electric rod placement and also have the benefit of already knowing his attack pattern. He goes down extremely quickly and there isn't too much to say. ElecMan is probably a C tier as well, since its battle is pretty much on the same level as GutsMan. Outside of Land's House, we can talk to Chod and fight ProtoMan. Some of the comments have mentioned the pronunciation of his name. I totally get that it comes from the French word for hot, show, but the NT Warrior show always called him Chod, and so that stuck with me from when I was a kid. Back to ProtoMan though. I'm not going to say he's the easiest boss in the game, but he actually might be. The strategy here is to stand in place and charge up. Then we wait for ProtoMan to come up to us, after which he does a longsword or a widesword, depending on whether he charges up or not. We can avoid it very easily and then punish him. Starforce Mega's charge shot of 30 damage means that it does take a while, but it's extremely easy to avoid these 2 attacks and take down ProtoMan. But believe it or not, we can make this battle even easier, as demonstrated here by Battle Network Mega. We don't even need to move. When we hit him with a charge shot, ProtoMan's attack is interrupted and he goes back to hiding in the back row. This happens regardless of whether or not he's going in for a longsword or a widesword, and so as long as we have a charge shot ready for him as soon as he comes in front of us, ProtoMan goes down extremely easily. It's a pretty drastic change from how he is in later games, but right now, ProtoMan is a D tier. Next up, we can find BombMan in Undernet 7. Like before, he's a reasonably hard boss. The strategy I came up with last time was to just shoot through his bombs and pellet him to death. This time, with a much faster and more powerful charge shot, I thought that we'd be able to use the charge shot more effectively. This fight took several tries for no other reason than I was pretty dead set on using the charge shot. In the winning fight, I still use it, but it's basically used to attack BombMan when he comes up to one of his bombs to kick it onto our side of the field. It's somewhat difficult to actually avoid the blast from his attacks, depending on the placement of the bombs once they come over. Once BombMan gets below a certain HP, he uses a mine attack which can do major damage to us. This makes me much more careful in terms of where I navigate, but it's still mostly fine in terms of avoiding his attacks. After a certain point though, I just give up on the charge shot strategy and start pelleting him to death. With Starforce Mega, it's a much more annoying fight. The bombs take 2 charge shots to destroy, meaning that I'm not doing a ton of damage to BombMan himself the longer I use the charge shot strategy. I realized after a bit that I should just stick to the pellets as much as possible. BombMan almost always sticks to the bottom right panel after creating the bombs, so I just get rid of any bombs in that row and then keep shooting my pellets. The mine is always going to be a problem since you just don't know where it's going to be, but there's definitely some room for error because we're doing a good enough job of avoiding his bomb blasts. BombMan is probably another A tier boss when it comes to Buster only. I'm sure that he would have been easy with even the most basic chips, but having to deal with the obstacles of the bombs as well as a mine makes it very frustrating. Next in the arena is MagicMan. He has 900 HP and I start off with Starforce Mega. MagicMan's gimmick is that he can summon 2 viruses at the same time on his side of the field, as well as use a fire attack that does a whopping 160 damage. It's extremely slow, but because we're avoiding multiple attacks at the same time, we can walk right into it if we aren't careful. There are some combinations of viruses that feel absolutely impossible to deal with together without taking major damage, including the clouds that can summon rain on our side of the field. Similar to the first time that we fought him in the story, what we really want is to have a certain configuration of mostly harmless enemies on MagicMan's side, namely Spookies. These ghosts really don't do much and are relatively easy to avoid, so as long as we get rid of the other enemies, we can just charge shot away at the main boss until he goes down. I do take a lot of damage along the way, but these ghosts take a lot of time in between their attacks, so as long as we get rid of the other enemies, we can just charge shot away until he goes down. Once we've established the strategy, the battle is much easier with Battle Network Mega. Our 80 damage charge shot helps us deal with viruses much more easily, but I'm having trouble dealing with this floating head thing. I accidentally kill a Spooky, but we're doing plenty of damage to MagicMan, so it's okay. We accidentally get hit by a few shock attacks towards the end of the battle, which is problematic because their stun will take us out of our charging status, meaning that we have to wait until we're not stunned anymore to finally finish MagicMan off. I'll put MagicMan in the A tier. He's a decent boss who's very hard to deal with Buster only because there's a lot going on, but we can take him down with the right configuration of viruses. Now, let's move on to the secret bosses. In Undernet 8, we can fight PharoahMan, who has 1000 HP and is quite different from the fight in Battle Network 2. We start off with Starforce Mega, and have to deal with PharoahMan floating up and down the rightmost column while throwing rock blocks and buttons onto our sides, as well as summoning sarcophagi that can use laser attacks or rat attacks in a straight line. I honestly don't know what the button does, because it is extremely avoidable just like all of PharoahMan's attacks. Because he doesn't have any defenses, we can just follow him up and down while avoiding his attacks to defeat him without taking any damage. With Battle Network Mega, the fight is almost exactly the same, except faster because we do more damage. There really isn't anything to say because even in Battle Network 2, PharoahMan was a pushover, and so in this game, he's a D tier boss. The next secret boss is ShadowMan, who we also fight again in Battle Network 2. I decided to start off with normal Mega, and the big issue is that ShadowMan has multiple copies who can take our charge shots instead of the real thing, which wastes a long charge shot. We do need to get rid of the copies when we can though, because otherwise they'll use a bomb attack that goes in a straight line, and ShadowMan moves pretty quickly so I don't see it coming most of the time. Besides that, he has a shuriken attack where he jumps in the air and follows us with 3 of them. This is a pretty easy attack to avoid most of the time, and I consider this his best attack for us when it comes to punishing him. Every time he uses it, he stays on the panel that he was just on for a while, after which you can hit him with a full charge shot. If we do this enough times, ShadowMan goes down pretty quickly. With Starforce, the battle is a little bit more annoying. On one hand, the very quick charge shot means that it feels good not to waste quote unquote a full charge shot on a clone, but on the other hand, we can't really punish ShadowMan enough when he does his shuriken attack. We're only doing 30 damage versus the 80 we were doing prior, and he moves too quickly for us to get 2 charge shots in. This is not necessarily a hard battle, but one that really requires patience. With Starforce Mega, ShadowMan goes down to an inferior form of the same strategy, and so with that, I'll put him in the C tier. Now that we're done with all of the main story bosses, let's get to Undernet 9 and fight the exclusive boss to this remake, ClockMan. I start off with Starforce Mega, and ClockMan is tough because he throws clock hands, which we can destroy with 2 charge shots, but he also has a few really quick moving special attacks. He moves around really quickly and is generally hard to hit. There's a beam that's relatively easy to avoid, a dragon attacking from the leftmost column, and worst of all, ClockMan summoning Rogue from Starforce 2 and 3. Rogue comes to our side of the field and attacks us up to 5 times, and with each attack doing 200 damage. ClockMan's final special attack is when he pushes the clock in the background and attacks the right 2 columns on our side of the arena. But this is a great attack for us to exploit because we can get a ton of charge shots in while he stands in place. Overall, this battle literally comes down to one thing. Can we dodge the Rogue summoning attack? I lost several battles where things were going really well, but I didn't pay attention and boom, all of a sudden I'm down several hundred HP and one simple mistake ends the fight. Thankfully, in this winning fight, we have plenty of room for error and still make it through. With Battle Network Mega, we have fewer chances to hit ClockMan because of the clock hand swinging at us. He moves very quickly, so it's pretty painful when we spend all this time dodging his attacks and charging up, only to miss him or accidentally hit a clock hand. The advantage though is that when he does use a move like either of the laser beams, it makes it incredibly easy to take 80 or even 120 HP in one go. Towards the end of the battle, I start making some mistakes and not paying attention to the clock in the back, which signals the next special move, but we finally get lucky with the Mega Clock Laser that lets us finish ClockMan off. I'll give him an A rank. He's a good, varied boss with plenty of interesting moves, and he's difficult to hit as well. We've got every boss out of the way except one, and there's still a good amount of video left, so you know that we're back to base. Base has only one form, so we'll be fighting the same version of him that we fought in the original playthrough. The difference this time is that we'll be fighting him with both versions of Mega Man, and we won't be able to use the invis or pop-up chips like last time, which helped us dodge and avoid most of his attacks. We find Base by exploring under Net 12, where he has a 6.25% chance of showing up, so we go in with Battle Network Mega. Base starts off with one move, the Air Burst. This is extremely easy to avoid since it's just a fast moving attack in a single row, but it does have a minor telegraph when he brings his busters out of his cloak. The biggest hurdle though is that he has a 100 HP aura, which he only lets go of when he charges his second attack, Explosion. We can typically only get one full charge shot in, doing 80 damage, and then mash the B button as fast as we can for additional damage. Now, for the attack itself, if you look closely, his hand will glow red, yellow, or blue, and the attack that comes after depends on this color. Red and yellow are bad, while blue is definitely manageable, so let's start off describing that one. The blue explosion attack has a ball of electricity circling our side of the stage in a figure 8, and it's very easy to avoid. It always starts in the middle rightmost panel on our side of the stage and goes upwards, so we're fine for a bit if we're in the panel right below that and then strafe back and forth in the top row. His yellow explosion attack is probably the one that's hardest to avoid and requires the most guessing, but every once in a while, the RNG will work out in our favor. He shoots a ton of fast moving electric sparks, but you'll notice that each ball has two panels covered in purple even though there's only one electric ball. Even though it may be tight, there is always enough space between two sparks to move out of the way. Finally, the last attack, the red explosion, is what I would consider the difference between a good run and a bad one. Here's a montage of how bad it can be. Base will flash the ground beneath you twice before sparks show up, but this happens so quickly that it's very difficult to figure out where to go. I usually default to pressing right and then going back, but it's almost entirely RNG and luck when this works out. Sometimes, you'll have a round where it feels like every panel is sparked, and other times you can camp out in the middle and avoid everything. After realizing that I just don't have the reaction speed to deal with this attack, I realized I need a new strategy. I found a few mentions of a pause buffer method to avoid Base's attacks, both in the comments of the original playthrough as well as across the internet, but I couldn't find any details or videos on exactly how to pull this off. So I started experimenting. When Base would use the move, I would press the start button rapidly to try and pause on the frame that Base would telegraph where the sparks would be. This way, I would have enough time to figure out if I had to move and if so, where to move, which I just couldn't do reliably in real time. I didn't get the frames right all the time, but with enough practice, I got it right enough of the time. As you can imagine, I spent hours facing Base with Battle Network Mega. After more attempts than I can count, we finally had a winning run. He starts off with a red explosion, and due to the pause trick, we're able to avoid damage, followed by a blue attack that was easy to avoid. Finally, we get a yellow explosion, and this is extremely difficult to avoid unless we get the right RNG. And as you can see, I also tried using the pause trick here to see whether or not we could figure out where to go next. We're in a hairy spot once, but RNG is our friend, so I've got Base below 1000 HP with no damage taken after he uses another blue explosion. The next yellow explosion is the best RNG we could have asked for, with almost nothing coming down the middle row. Then, unfortunately, we have 3 red explosions in a row and get hit 3 times. It is not easy to avoid this move even with the pause trick. The next yellow explosion though gives us another instance of absolutely perfect RNG, basically no sparks down the middle. Base is down below 300 HP and we've got 400, meaning we can take 2 more hits from him. However, I do get hit during the next red explosion attack. He uses a blue one, meaning that we get free damage in, and there are 2 charge shots left until victory. With the second blue explosion in a row, we have a free path to a win as long as I don't choke, and after so many attempts, I am glad that I didn't. I never want to do that fight again. But I committed to beating each boss with both versions of Mega Man, so now we have to do hard mode and fight him with Star Force. The charge shot is weaker, and so we can typically do around 60 damage whether we get 2 charge shots in or a charge shot followed by rapid fire. This battle is pretty similar to the one versus Battle Network Mega, except on steroids since we need to avoid so many more attacks. In the winning battle, we start off with a red explosion, and thankfully, I've mostly got the timing for the pauses down. One of the questions I had was whether the shield would be useful in this battle, since it would help deal with a lot of Base's attacks. Unfortunately, I tested this in several battles prior to this winning fight, and all of his attacks went through the shield every single time. Now, as you can imagine, I'm not going to get the crazy luck with the yellow explosion every time, and our first hit during this battle is from the yellow explosion, while Base still has 1250 HP. That's not a great sign, considering we barely won the last fight with a single hit remaining, and that was with doing a lot more damage. I'm still trying to use the pause button to make sure I have a relatively safe path after being cornered from the yellow explosion. It doesn't always work though, so I'm at 600 HP and this looks like another dud. Now things start turning around and we get some good luck with 4 blue explosions in quick succession with 1 red explosion in between, and I've learned not to miss the opportunity when I've got it. We get even more blue explosion attacks, and with that, I've lessened the gap in HP, with Base at 710 while I have 600. Now, it seems like we've got a puncher's chance. There's a manageable yellow explosion, and for the first time, we've taken the lead over Base in terms of HP. That's short-lived though, since he traps me in the bottom left corner with his yellow explosion, and I'm down to 400. After that, I start seeing a lot more yellow explosions, perhaps making up for the good luck I've seen from all the blues thus far. Similar to the winning battle with Battle Network Mega, I get some generally good RNG and they're relatively easy to avoid. After another blue explosion, Base is down to 200 HP. That's 3 cycles, assuming I can get all of my charge shots and some extra pellets in there. The next round is a blue explosion, which is great, but the last one is a yellow and I get trapped again. At 200 HP, I've got a clear path to victory here. Avoid the air burst and fit 2 charge shots in there. As Base is charging his next yellow explosion, we finally take him down in 4 minutes and 31 seconds versus Battle Network Mega's 2 minutes and 42 seconds. I think it goes without saying, but that is an S tier. Base is so much harder than the other bosses in the game that's not even funny. With that, we've beaten every boss in the game with only the Mega Buster and without battle chips. I hope you're all having a ton of fun with the Legacy Collection, as well as with all the new Battle Network content that will be coming out in the coming days. So if you don't want to miss out, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.